Have you ever had a leader who thought they were smart, but you knew differently? No names, please. As leaders, we are expected to be smart at the functional or discipline side of things of what we were created, what we're intended to manage. And yet at the same time, I have seen many leaders over the years that were pretty good at the technical side of things, but not so great at the people side of things. And when that happens, that can cause a lot of havoc in organizations, both inside and without the organization outside. So what I want to talk about this evening is how real leaders embody smart with heart. They know about the functional, the technical side of the business, but they also can excel at the people side of the business. And I've always been fascinated by this. So I've created something called the 7 Elements of Relational Leadership. Many of you have a handout in front of you. If you don't, you might look on to your neighbors there. We can always get some extras. And in this model, what I've done was I took a look at what was important to us as leaders, that we've got to be able to master these 7 elements of relational leadership. Now, each of them have 2 virtues. In our time here this evening, we're only going to get to the very first one, which is our relationship with self. We have to start there. So we have to know who we are before we can be good at leading others. So as we look at this first element, I want to share a couple of things with you. So I have worked a lot of years in, as Lauren mentioned, in the DISC model and the Myers-Briggs. Some of you may be familiar with the MBTI, and maybe you've taken it one time or another. There are actually 16 4-letter types to the model here. And so you might be an ISTJ or an ENFP or an ESTJ, something like that. Well, there's actually a 17th 4-letter type, and I want to make sure you write that down. So please write this one down. That 17th type is the JERK. You may have worked with some of those. Well, my husband is a BRIT. He comes from England, and he's the furthest thing ever from a JERK. He's my soulmate and my partner and just a wonderful man. When Dave first moved to the United States permanently in the early 1990s, he had an opportunity to work for Marion Merrill Dow. And those of us in the Kansas City area know that the late Ewing Kauffman and his wife Muriel did so much for the Kansas City community in which we live. One thing you might not know, it's kind of a little known fact, is how Mr. Kauffman started out with his business. He actually started selling supplement pills, calcium supplement pills that were made from seashells. And so what he would do is he would call on several doctors every day, and when he would stop in at a doctor's office, he would just take one of those calcium supplements and pop it in his mouth just to show them how safe they were. What he soon discovered was, after taking several of those each day, was they also served as a mild laxative. So he became very self-aware very quickly. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at what real leaders do in learning to get a better relationship with self. The 2 virtues are self-awareness and self-discipline. So that's what we're going to explore this evening. So Mr. Kauffman was a very smart businessman. We all know that. And one of the things that his self-awareness led him to was a realization that he needed to rely upon others to make his business grow. And so to demonstrate his loyalty to his workers, he would often go at Christmas time out on the production line floor and actually give out shares to the company. And there were actually some people that retired as millionaires. He was a wonderful leader. People loved him. They would follow him. And I do think he was a great example of a guy that was able to balance smart with heart. So several years ago, I had an opportunity to work with a woman who was a great teacher. Her name was Elaine Yarbrough. And one of the things that Elaine said, I've never forgotten, she said this: you cannot take a group any further than you are. Think about that. You can't take a group any further than you are. And that's one of the reasons why I believe self-development and our personal growth is so important. Because as leaders, we can only give to others what we have. So that's really a key thing. So we're going to look at a couple of strategies here this evening. And on the back of the model, what you'll see on your handout there are a few places where you can jot down some strategies here. Because I do believe that real leaders get to know themselves. They develop that relationship with themselves. And they focus on knowing themselves through self-awareness and then practicing self-discipline. So here are some strategies for self-awareness. The first thing that we have to do is we have to commit to our own behavior, our own self-awareness, and to learn about how our behavior is affecting those around us. Second thing that we have to do is we have to take time each day to assess our behavior, to ask ourselves, how did I do today? Was I kind to people? Was I a little bit gruff at times? Was I clear in my expectations? I think the third strategy is that we have to take a self-assessment tool like DISC or like Myers-Briggs. I've worked a lot with those over the years. Or you can do what Mr. Kaufman did and take calcium supplement pills to add to your self-awareness. But take that tool to learn about how you see yourself. And then the next strategy is to take a 360 assessment where you can invite others, those that you lead, those that are peers in your workplace, and get a perspective on how others see you. That's an important piece of that too. And then the last one that we have to do, maybe consider, is consider hiring a coach to speed up that self-awareness process. So those are some strategies for self-awareness. Probably most of you know that just knowing more about who we are doesn't solve the problem though. We do have to develop the self-discipline to make the changes to the behavior that we want. So here are some strategies for increased self-discipline. The first thing, and again, you can jot that down on your handouts there if you want. The first thing we have to do is, again, commit to the process of changing our behavior. And commitment is always the first step, so do that. Secondly, if we can take the, let's see, what is the second one? This is a senior moment here. Create, thank you. Create a task or a daily action that you can build in and help you move towards your achievement of your goal there. The third one that we want to do is to be able to schedule it into our calendar. Now let me share a little example about that and why scheduling is so important. I coached a supervisor several years ago. She was a very results-oriented woman. And I said, you know, one of the things you need to do, she'd gotten a lot of feedback from people that reported to her that all she ever gave them was negative feedback. Anyone ever worked with anyone like that? And so I shared with her, I said, you know, you need to let people know when they've done a good job. And her response was, why should I have to do that? I pay them. That's what they need to do. And I talked with her about the idea that if she wanted the results, she would, everyone's style is different, she would need to take a little bit of time and sincerely, and that's the key, sincerely thank some person each day for something very specific that they've done. So she was kind of a little skeptical about this, but she agreed to give it a try. And sure enough, within a very short period of time, people were responding to her differently. They began to develop trust in her because she was just taking the time to thank them for what they were doing and what they were contributing to the organization. So another thing that you can do, another strategy, is to consider getting an accountability partner. Someone that will keep you honest and call you on your stuff when you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You kind of drop off the wagon a little bit there. And then the last one is to be able to celebrate those successes. So when you maybe falter a little bit, you know, you just say, but look what I did. I was successful in this. You know, I think it takes a lot of courage to develop the relationship with ourselves, to develop that self-awareness and that self-discipline. But if we do that, we can become a more effective leader. I think people are really hungry for real leaders today. Someone mentioned Zig Ziglar a little bit earlier. And I think we probably all know that old phrase that Zig Ziglar back in the 1970s said that was so important. He said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And here we are almost 50 years later. And I still see a lot of organizations and leaders that don't seem to have the heart. If you want to know whether your organization has any heart or not, you can ask some questions like, how well are we doing in employee turnover? What about employee engagement? Are people coming to the workforce every day, bringing their whole selves and excited and ready to be here? What about customer service? How are we doing in treating others? And I think that also is a tough question to sometimes be able to answer. Did anyone happen to see the video that went viral recently? It was with Travis Kalanick, who's the CEO of Uber, where he got into a very heated discussion with one of his drivers. Well, it's all over the place, so there's no denying it. So I understand that he's come forward now and said, I must fundamentally change and grow up as a leader. So his self-awareness has begun. Now it's a question of, can he develop the self-discipline? I understand he's hired a coach. So we'll see if he's able to do that. So I think that's important. So we have to connect with ourselves, and then we can connect with others. Speaking of connection, one of my favorite thought leaders, it was mentioned earlier tonight, is Brene Brown. Any Brene Brown fans in the room here? Okay. And I love what she says about connection. It's on your handout there too. She said, I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can receive and give without judgment, and when they get and derive sustainability and connection. So substance and strength from the relationship. So I think that's so important. We have to have that connection with people. So I want to talk just very quickly about a man that I think demonstrates that point of connection here in the Kansas City area, another great leader. His name is Greg Graves, and he's the recent CEO who retired from Burns & McDonnell, which is an employee-owned engineering firm here in Kansas City. Now, under his leadership, Burns & Mac has made some great progress. For several years running, they've been named as one of the best places in the country to work. They've done very well financially. I had a chance to read an article that was written about Greg Graves. It was called Greg Graves' Leadership That Matters. And in it, what he said was this. He said, one of his calculus teachers told him many years ago, Greg, the only thing that matters in life is to matter in life. That's pretty profound. The only thing that matters in life is to matter in life. And I think Greg and his wife Deanna have practiced that mantra for Kansas City here and done so much for our great city. I have a friend that is an executive at Burns & Mac. So I asked him one day, I said, give me an example of the kind of leader that Greg is. And he said, oh, there's so many. And then he went on to say, when I was a mid-level manager here at the organization, and I had somebody come into my office one day, a direct report, and he said, he was distraught. He said, I don't know what to do. My father's in the hospital, out in a remote hospital about 2 hours from here. I don't see him getting any better. In fact, I think he's getting worse, and I don't know how to manage his care, and I feel very helpless. And my friend said, tell you what, give me a couple of hours, let me talk to Greg about this, and I'll get back to you before the end of the day. So I went into Greg's office and told him what the situation was, and Greg said, no problem, I'll make a couple of calls. And within just a few short hours, he was instrumental in getting this man's father moved from that rural hospital 2 hours away from Kansas City to KU Hospital, where he could get the help that he so desperately needed. He didn't know the manager, Greg didn't, and he certainly didn't know his father, but he cared enough to make the calls. And that, I think, is the real difference. Now, one of the other tidbits that you might not know about Greg Graves, well, a couple of things. First of all, in his tenure, he was able, because he was such a culture guy, that was really important to him. He wanted to be able to give back to the community in which he lived. And so he grew the Burns & McDonnell Foundation from $4.5 million to $30 million during his tenure as CEO. And really a lot of that money has gone back into our community. And another thing that's I think is quite fascinating was that when Burns & Mac first moved to Kansas City and they first moved into their first office, it was the old Marion Merrill Dow building. And Greg Graves spent 13 years of his career sitting in Mr. Kaufman's office. Pretty amazing. So here you have two incredible leaders, two leaders that shared the same office and also shared a commitment to smart with heart. We can't always know and can't always control the things that happen within our organizations, but we can choose to balance smart with heart. We can choose to make a difference. Choose to make that difference. Thank you.